Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Thank you so much for tuning in. Special time. Usually we'd be at 6 p.m. on a Sunday, but it is opening weekend of Guns and Moses, and Nina and I are going to be attending 3 Q&As at the Sunday shows here in the Lemley Town Center 5 in Encino in the LA area. If you're anywhere near, would love to see you there. We sold a bunch of tickets, but I believe there are still some left. Would love to see you there in Encino if you're in the area. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Gordo in Scotland, Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy, North Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bella in Florida, Belle in mid-Missouri, Lorraine in Texas, Frank in San Pedro, Ella in Southern California. Welcome, everybody. Let's do it. Another short daf. I would certainly have done a double if we weren't just so unbelievably busy. Big thanks to Matisyahu, who just collaborated with us on the most recent video featuring my training in Maganam, how I learned to become a protector of the Jewish people. God forbid we should ever need it, but if we do, we will not be a soft target. And so it's a kind of the training, a video showing a bit of the training I did in Maganam and how that training became Rabbi Mo's training in Guns and Moses. Very cool video set to Matisyahu's song King Without a Crown, which he allowed us to use and collaborated with us on the reel on Instagram. Very cool little reel. Nina, maybe you could share the link in the comments. Okay, our daf today is page 34. We're picking this up near the bottom of page 34a. The Mishna teaches that residual grape seeds and grape skins that belong to idolaters are prohibited. Again, we're in Tractate Avoda Zara, 27th volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 2, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 4, concept being we have to distance ourselves from idolatry. Idolaters use wine in their idolatrous practices, especially in the biblical and Talmudic times. And so the wine of idolaters absolutely prohibited to Jews, and even kind of surrounding objects and elements of their wine, like the wine skins and clay jugs that hold their wine, which we were talking about yesterday, and now the residue from the wine press. Right? If we take out the residue, grape skins and grape seeds, etc., that came out of the wine press of an idolater that was used to make wine that he would use in idolatry, stands to reason that those objects would be prohibited also, unless we can get a sort of sufficiently logical distance from the wine itself, at which point we can't just keep prohibiting every object that through some chain of logic or causation might have been, related step by step to idolatry, right? So where do we draw that line? Here, the Mishnah teaches, or our Mishnah taught, Mishnah 4 here in chapter 2, that the grape seeds and grape skins that belong to idolaters are prohibited for this reason. The sages taught moist grape seeds and grape skins that belong to idolaters are prohibited, but dry ones are permitted, right? Sufficient distance from the wine that was used for idolatry, or even possibly, we don't even know for sure that this wine was used, it's just that idolaters tend to do that. The Gemara asks which are considered moist and which are considered dry. And Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says grape residues are considered moist for all of the first 12 months after the grapes were pressed, and dry after the first 12 months. It was stated that Rabbi Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says when these grape residues are prohibited, one is prohibited even from deriving benefit from them, as opposed to consuming. It's always prohibited to consume anything that has any connection to idolatry, to eat it. But deriving benefit means could you buy or sell it, right? Just like a Jew can buy or sell non-kosher food that he's not permitted to eat. That's the difference between consumption and deriving benefit. When they are permitted even with regard to consumption. According to that view, Rav Zevid says with regard to these yeasts produced from the wine of Arameans, after 12 months of the year, they are permitted. Rav Chaviva, the son of Rava, says with regard to these jugs that belong to idolaters, after 12 months of the year, they are permitted. Rav Chaviva says with regard to these canteens belonging to Arabs, again, Arabs back then were not Muslim. Islam had not been invented yet. So we're talking about idolatrous Arabs. After 12 months of the year, they are permitted. Rav Acha, son of Rav Ika, says with regard to these Aramean grape pits, after 12 months of the year, they are permitted. And Rav Acha, the son of Rava, says with regard to these brown and black jugs, after 12 months of the year, they are permitted. Now we're on page 34b. The Mishnah teaches that fish stew is prohibited. Fish stew? Are we to learn from this that the idolaters would offer fish stew to the idols that they worship? No. The issue is that sometimes this fish stew would contain wine, and if these idolaters made it with this wine that they also use in idolatry, that would be a problem. Also, there's a separate problem that when they make their fish stew, even though it says fish, they might have, when they were catching the fish that went into it, also netted non-kosher animals from the sea, like crustaceans or squid. Basically, what Jews can eat from the sea is fish. Fish meaning fish with fins and scales. A catfish is a freshwater fish, for example, but that and a shark, not kosher, right? Not kosher because they don't satisfy all the requirements of a kosher fish. Pretty sure shark is not kosher. I'm almost sure of that. But like certainly, for example, porpoise, or orca, or any kind of whale, any kind of sea mammal, not kosher for a Jew to eat. Only fish with fins and scales. But the non-Jews who are permitted to eat such creatures, when they make a fish stew, they might include non-kosher fish in it. So two problems. Did they add wine to it that might have been used in idolatry? Are there non-kosher fish mixed into it? So the Mishnah teaches that fish stew is prohibited. The sages taught fish stew prepared by an expert is permitted, as professionals do not mix wine into it. So the issue being wine. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel says in the name of Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, chilak prepared by an expert is also permitted. Avimi, the son of Rabbi Abahu, would teach fish stew prepared by an expert is permitted. And he would teach this baraisa that he received through tradition, and then he would say its explanation. The first time and the second time that the fish stew is prepared from a fish, it is permitted, but the third time it is prohibited. And what is the reason? With regard to the first time and the second time, as the fish's oil is plentiful, there is no need to place wine in it. And from this point forward, the idolater might place wine in it to compensate for the insufficient fish oil. The Gemara relates that there was a certain boat carrying fish stew, which came to the port of Akko. And Rabbi Abba from Akko placed guards over it to ensure that no wine would be added to the fish stew. And Rava said to him, until now, who guarded it? Rabbi Abba said to him, until now, for what would we be concerned? If the problem is due to the concern that they mix wine in it, that concern is unfounded, as in the place where the fish stew was produced, a kista of fish stew sells for 1 luma, while a kista of wine sells for 4 luma. Since wine was more expensive than fish stew, there's no reason to suspect that wine was added to the stew before it reached Akko, where the fish stew is sold at a higher price than wine. There's a million reasons, literally, how we know that Jews are the indigenous people of the Holy Land. I mean, we could just start with the Bible, right, which has been read by billions of people worldwide and talks about the Jewish presence in the Holy Land more than 3,000 years ago. Here we're talking about 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, and we're just learning about the very, very common, mundane, day-to-day life, how the fish markets were run in Akko, right, which is in North Israel, We're often talking about the markets in Jerusalem and Bet Shemesh, in Sippori and Caesarea, around the Galilee. We study it constantly. What was the daily life like of our ancestors who lived in the Holy Land? Upon hearing this, Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Zara, but perhaps they came by means of Tyre, where wine is inexpensive and therefore likely to be added to the fish stew to increase its volume. And Rabbi Zara said to him, there, by way of Tyre, there are impediments and melted snow, which make travel very difficult, and the boat would not have sailed through that route. Interesting. I also find it interesting that you would dilute fish stew with wine, but only if there was insufficient fish oil, as if the wine and the fish oil, had a similar effect on the rest of the fish stew. I find that interesting. Maybe someone who's a chef can help me out there. The Mishna teaches, and cheese of Beit Unyaki is prohibited. Okay, new subject, going back to our Mishnah. What's the issue with cheese? Right, so with cheese, especially in the ancient world, they would use the stomachs, either the stomach contents, enzymes harvested from the stomachs, or actual lining of the stomach of animals, even if kosher animals, but not slaughtered in a kosher manner. Right, so if you have a kosher animal like a cow, a sheep, a goat, and is not slaughtered by a shochet, right, which is a kosher slaughterer, where they make a very specific incision across the neck of the animal, then the blood is drained. There's all kinds of requirements for kosher slaughter. So even if you have a kosher animal, but it was not slaughtered in a kosher manner, that animal is not kosher for eating by a Jew. That's known as a nevaila, an unslaughtered carcass. Then if you make cheese, well, first of all, there's a meat and dairy problem. But even if you say that the enzyme from the stomach is not a meat issue, it still would be the product of a nevaila. And that's going to render cheese made from that or using that enzyme not kosher, not permitted for a Jew to eat. Okay? So this is not so much of an idolatry problem as just a problem of eating cheese that comes from non-Jewish sources. So the Mishnah teaches, and cheese of Beit Unyaki is prohibited. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, for what reason did they prohibit deriving benefit from the cheese of Beit Unyaki? And it is because most of the calves of that city are slaughtered for the sake of idolatry. And the milk curdled in their stomach contents is prohibited. So Reish Lakish, Shimon ben Lakish, giving a different reason. Not because using that enzyme from an animal that was not slaughtered in a kosher manner, which renders it nevaila, but rather that most of the calves, did you say most? Most of the calves that they slaughter in that location get used for idolatry. So very possible that this enzyme, even if you say it's permitted to use an enzyme from a nevaila, even if you say it's permitted to use an enzyme from meat in order to curdle the cheese, even if you allow those two things, you can allow that you would harvest that enzyme from a calf that was slaughtered for the purpose of sacrificing that animal to idolatry. So the cheese that ends up getting made from the enzyme harvested from the stomach of that animal, prohibited. And the Gemara asks, why does this explanation specifically mention most calves? Even if a minority of calves were slaughtered for idolatry, this would also be reason enough, as Rabbi Meir, who is the Tana of unattributed opinions in a Mishnah, is generally concerned about a minority. Okay, even if only a few calves in that location were used for idolatry, we don't know whether the cheese that we're buying was processed using this enzyme from those few calves that were slaughtered for idolatry, or from the majority of calves that were not slaughtered for the purpose of idolatry. So Rabbi Meir says we are concerned about the minority, but the majority say we are not concerned about the minority. The Gemara explains, if you say that the reason for the prohibition is due to a majority of calves slaughtered for idolatry, then despite the fact that the majority of animals in general that are used to curdle cheese are not slaughtered for idolatrous purposes, there are nevertheless a minority of animals altogether, i.e. the majority of calves that are, and this minority of calves are cause for concern according to Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara continues, but if you say that Rabbi Meir prohibits the cheese due to a minority of calves, right, because it's possible that the cheese was made from the enzyme harvested from a calf used for idolatry, since there are a majority of calves that are not slaughtered for idolatry, and there are also a wider majority of remaining animals used to curdle milk that are not slaughtered for idolatry at all. So this would constitute a minority of a minority, right? Even if in that location, like if we say that in that location, it's the minority of calves that are slaughtered for idolatry. And then in the world of all the calves, not just in that location, but in the whole world, the majority of calves are not slaughtered for idolatry. It's just in that place where they raise a lot of calves for idolatry. But in the wider world, for sure, the majority of calves are not slaughtered for idolatry. So you have a minority of a minority, and even Rabbi Meir would not make a prohibition based on the minority of a minority. So why would we be concerned that Rabbi Meir would object to this? And Rabbi Meir is not concerned for a minority of a minority, since only a particular minority of animals is used to curdle cheese, i.e. calves, and of them only a minority are ever slaughtered for idolatry, and even within that group only a minority are actually slaughtered. Even Rabbi Meir would not be concerned. So Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim said to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, even when calves are slaughtered for the sake of idol worship, what of it? But are you not the one who permits animals slaughtered with idolatrous intentions? Now, whoa. We were talking about a minority, so maybe we're going to permit it. We're talking about a minority of a minority. Okay, why in the world would we not permit it? But now we're arriving at a different opinion altogether. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim is saying to Reish Lakish, didn't you say that even if we know the calf was slaughtered for the purpose of idolatry, you would still permit it? Permit it? What do you mean, permit it? Permit us to eat the animal? No way, unless it was slaughtered kosher. And if it was slaughtered kosher, it wasn't slaughtered for idolatry. So I guess permitted to derive benefit from it, buy and sell it, permitted to use this enzyme and then curdle cheese with it, but from an animal that we know was slaughtered for the purpose of idolatry? Why would the saintly and wise beyond all measure, Reish Lakish, permit such a thing? And so what we're going to get to is this idea that, whoa. Was it slaughtered for idolatry? Or was it simply slaughtered? And some of its blood that came out, they took that and they used it for an idolatrous offering. And the rest of the calf they use for other things, baking hamburgers and using the enzyme to curdle cheese. But so even though some of this calf ended up being used for idolatry, the slaughter of the calf wasn't for the purpose of idolatry. It was just to get a dead calf, and then that dead calf was divvied up. Some of it was used for idolatry, the rest of it was used for other things. And so in that situation, sounds like we have a minority opinion, Reish Lakish, who would actually permit because it wasn't slaughtered for idolatry. Slaughter was, killing it was a necessary step, but the purpose of the killing wasn't for idolatry. It just yielded some products that were later used for idolatry. That's Reish Lakish's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan, his dear friend and debate partner, senior to Reish Lakish, although they were colleagues, overruled Reish Lakish in this, as we shall see. As it was stated, the law with regard to one who slaughters an animal in order to sprinkle its blood for the sake of idolatry, or to burn its prohibited fat for idolatry, is subject to a dispute between Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says deriving benefit from the animal is prohibited, as he holds that one can intend from one rite to another rite, R-I-T-E. In other words, idolatrous intent while slaughtering an animal renders it prohibited, even if the intention pertains not to the slaughter itself, but to sprinkling the blood or the fat that emerges from that slaughter. And he maintains that we derive laws concerning intent outside the temple from the laws concerning intent inside the temple. Since such intentions at the time of slaughter render an animal prohibited within the temple, they render it prohibited outside the temple as well with regard to idolatry. Right? So very interesting. Rabbi Yochanan is learning out if at the time when the temple is standing and somebody's bringing an offering, a permitted offering, a Jewish offering in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, and the priest who slaughters that offering is thinking that he's going to bring that offering up on the altar, let's say 3 days from now, that would render the slaughter invalid. Immediately that animal is disqualified because he has an improper intent at the time of its slaughter. Right? So at the time of slaughter, you have to have proper intent with regard to that offering. And he says we can learn out from that law in the world of Jewish offerings, Torah offerings within the Holy Temple. We can learn principles from that law that we could apply to whether or not some other animal from the idolaters that we may or may not bring into our world to use, let's say it's leather or something, or this enzyme for curdling cheese. He says that if at the time it was slaughtered, it was even imagined by the guy slaughtering it that some part of that animal would be used for idolatry, the whole animal is disqualified completely for any kind of use by the Jewish people. And that is the law. We follow Rabbi Yochanan in that. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, the minority opinion, deriving benefit from the animal is permitted. Apparently, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish holds that slaughtering an animal for the sake of idol worship does not render the animal itself prohibited, and this contradicts his previous assertion that it is prohibited to derive benefit from calves that have been slaughtered for the sake of idolatry. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said to Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim, "May your fortune be auspicious." The case here is where one says that he is worshiping the idol at the conclusion of the slaughter. Since the act of slaughtering itself is an act of worship, then the calf would be rendered prohibited immediately. But if they're just slaughtering lots of animals and some of that product is going to be used later, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish thinks that connection to idolatry is too attenuated and he would permit the animal. But we don't follow that view. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Yishmael asked Rabbi Yehoshua a series of questions. And the Gemara notes that Rav Achadevoy says that Rav says, okay, now, here we're going to get into what is obviously a hypothetical question meant to, spark thought among the students in the study hall, like figure out what we're talking about here and how do the principles extend from one area of the law to another, how are they interconnected, as we shall see. I'm going to go on a limb and guarantee, with no evidence, but it seems to me, that this incident, that this hypothetical situation never was an incident, and this never happened among the Jewish people. I do not believe that this was ever based on an incident. This is a pure hypothetical situation, as you shall see from the story, I think fictional, of the worst bachelor ever. With regard to one who betroths a woman by giving her the excrement of an ox that is to be stoned, the woman is betrothed, provided that the excrement was worth at least 1 peruta, 1 penny. What's going on here? Some guy is going to say to a woman, I would like to marry you. I have to give you an item of value. So I'm going to give you the excrement of an ox that stands to be stoned. What is the ox that stands to be stoned? That is an ox that killed a human. And so it needs to be put down and it's going to be stoned to death. That ox will have a trial. Already, it now stands to be stoned. It already had a trial. It was found guilty of killing a human. And so now the point is that such an ox, we cannot derive benefit from it. Even though an ox is worth a lot of money. Living, it can do all kinds of work, pulling the plow, pulling a wagon, etc. Dead, there's a whole lot of beef there, whole lot of beef. Plus its hide, its horns, there's a lot of value there. But if it was stoned because it murdered a human, then we cannot derive any benefit from it. For a man to betroth a woman, he has to give her some object of value. In ancient times, there was two separate things. There was the betrothal, and then there was the marriage. Betrothal, we think of it a little bit like giving an engagement ring and getting engaged. But in modern times, if you get engaged to a woman and then the two of you decide to break off the engagement, you don't need a divorce. A betrothal, if you break off a betrothal, you would need a divorce document. So even though it's not a complete marriage, it has many of the legal requirements of marriage. But you have to give an item of value. Diamond ring would be nice. Excrement of an ox that stands to be stoned, not so nice, but, excrement of oxes is fertilizer. It has value. It can be used for things. And, a good pile of ox poop, especially in a place where there's farms and they need that pile, probably worth more than a peruta. But the issue is, since it's prohibited as a product, one step removed, so to speak, from the ox that stands to be stoned, can you say that that excrement has any value at all? Does the guy own it and have a right to use it if we have another law that says you cannot derive benefit from the ox that stands to be stoned? So the first ruling that we're reading is she is betrothed, right? If she is betrothed, that means that he has the right to use this object, right? This excrement from the ox that stands to be stoned. So he has the right to use it as his own property. You can only betroth a woman with your own property, and it has to be worth at least a penny. So this would suggest that even though we can't derive benefit from the ox that stands to be stoned, we can derive benefit from its excrement. Let's keep reading. She is betrothed, provided that the excrement was worth one peruta. Although no benefit may be derived from the ox itself, it is permitted to derive benefit from its excrement. But if one attempts to betroth her with the excrement of calves that were used as offerings of idolatry, then she is not betrothed, as even their excrement is forbidden. And the Gemara remarks, if you wish, propose logical reasoning, and if you wish, cite a verse to substantiate this claim. Right? The interesting matter that's being discussed here is that even though you can't derive benefit from an ox that stands to be stoned, you can derive benefit from its excrement. Even though you cannot derive benefit from a calf that was used for idolatry, you cannot you cannot derive benefit from its excrement. This is to teach you that the prohibition on any object connected even loosely with idolatry is the strongest prohibition there is, even more than the prohibition on deriving benefit from an ox that stands to be stoned because it killed a person. So the Gemara elaborates. If you wish, propose logical reasoning. With regard to calves used for idol worship, a calf's additional girth derived from the excrement that was stored in its body is satisfactory for the worshiper, as fatter animals are more impressive offerings. Therefore, now that something came out of the offering, of this calf that would be used as an offering, while it was inside, it was a little bit of a bigger calf, and that's better for the idolater. Since the excrement is part of the offering, it is also forbidden. But with regard to an ox that is to be stoned, its additional girth is not satisfactory for the owner, as he gains nothing from it. It wasn't really part of the ox. It would have gored or not gored, whether there was this amount of excrement in it or not. And if you wish, cite a verse to prove it. It is written here, with regard to an animal used for idolatry, and there shall cleave naught of the dedicated thing to your hand, Deuteronomy 13:18, which indicates that the entire animal is forbidden. And it is written there with regard to an ox to be stoned, the ox shall be stoned and its flesh shall not be eaten, Exodus 21:28. And this teaches that its flesh is forbidden, but its excrement would be permitted. Rava said we learn both of these laws from the Mishnah, and he explains from the fact that Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Yishmael that the cheese of idolaters is prohibited because they curdle it in the stomach contents of unslaughtered animal carcass, nevaila. One can derive the law of the excrement of an ox that is to be stoned. And the reason is that Rabbi Yishmael responded to Rabbi Yehoshua, but isn't the stomach of a burnt offering subject to a more stringent law than the stomach of a nevaila? And yet, although one may not derive benefit from the stomach of a burnt offering ab initio, if one did derive benefit from it, he is not liable for misuse of property consecrated to the temple. We're at the top of 35a. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So one can learn by inference from here that with regard to animals from which deriving benefit is prohibited, nonetheless, their excrement, which is the content of their stomach, is permitted. Although deriving benefit from both a burnt offering and a nevaila is prohibited, the excrement of each is permitted. Similarly, although deriving benefit from an ox that is to be stoned is prohibited, its excrement is permitted. And from the fact that Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Yishmael, the cheese of idolaters is prohibited because they curdle it with the stomach contents of calves used for idol worship, and that Rabbi Yishmael responded to him, if that is so, why didn't the sages prohibit deriving benefit from the cheese? One may learn by inference that with regard to animals of idolatry, their excrement is prohibited. Since the cheese formed with the stomach contents of an animal of idolatry is prohibited, it is evident that the excrement, which was formed in the stomach of such an animal, is also prohibited. And the Mishnah related that rather than addressing Rabbi Yishmael's final difficulty, Rabbi Yehoshua diverted his attention to another matter. And the Gemara inquires, but let him respond to Rabbi Yishmael's query by explaining that the sages did not prohibit deriving benefit from cheese curdled in the stomach contents of an animal used for idolatry, because there is no substantive prohibited entity in such cheese. And the Gemara reinforces its question. After all, isn't the law with regard to fish stew, according to the opinion of the rabbis, an application of this rationale? Meaning, they did not prohibit deriving benefit from fish stew prepared by an idolater. And what is the reason for this leniency? Is it not because there is no substantive prohibited entity in it? Although fish stew may contain the wine of an idolater, deriving benefit from it is not prohibited because the wine is not discernible. Why didn't Rabbi Yehoshua explain that deriving benefit from cheese of an idolater is similarly permitted because it contains no substantive prohibited entity? And the Gemara rejects this possibility. The sages say in response that here, with regard to cheese, since the rennet curdles it, it is considered like an item that contains a substantive prohibited entity. Although the prohibited rennet is not discernible in the cheese, it is nevertheless considered a substantive prohibited entity because it is essential to the formation of the cheese. And now we're going to take some questions. But one thing to remember here. We don't paskin halacha from the Gemara. Meaning, as we read the Gemara, and we think we understand, and we try to understand the logic of what the sides are arguing back and forth, and we even hear what the majority ruled on a certain matter, and then we think, oh, okay, well, I get it. So therefore, if a food doesn't contain any prohibited substances, it must be kosher. But that's not the law today, right? Today, if you want to eat something that is kosher, for the most part, it has to have a kosher marking on it, right? If it's any kind of cooked processed food that you buy in the supermarket, like produce, generally, again, there's always exceptions, but produce is generally kosher. You may have to wash it, make sure that there's no bugs in it. But for the most part, fruit, vegetables that you buy in the supermarket are going to be kosher. And for the most part, anything that comes in a box, with the ingredients listed on it, even though it might be have only kosher ingredients in it, if it doesn't have a kosher marking, a hechsher, it's not kosher. And there's lots of questions of kashrut that come up in the modern world. And you can't just base it on your own logical reasoning when you read the Gemara. If you're not sure whether something's kosher or not, you need to check with your local Orthodox rabbi. You can often do the research online, but it has to be from a credible source. One of the most famous being the OU, the Orthodox Union, although there are many other recognized kosher authorities. But it can't be just based on your own reasoning, right? You have to do that extra step because there's so much else going on in the modern world that wasn't a factor then, and has caused the law to require adjustments and tweaks in order to cover situations that arise in the modern world. Okay, Ray the shark. Yes, thank you, Sharon. Shark is not kosher. I was sure, but I want to make sure. It has scales when young, but loses them. There was a lot of discussion about shark, but it was ultimately determined to not be kosher even when young. Thank you, Sharon. And Yehudit also, it's a predatory fish, which makes fish not kosher. Is that true? Don't most fish eat other fish? Just the fact that a fish is a predator makes it not kosher? I need to learn more about that. I'm not sure that that's true. I want to learn more about that. Maybe predator means more than just whether it eats other fish or not. Right? I need to learn more about that. Roger, these last few Mishnayos were my aha moment as to why we need reliable hectors. It ensures you can trust the product. Just so. Thank you, Roger. Elanit, I wonder how the Jewish priest who slaughtered with bad intention would be willing to admit it. And this would have to happen quickly to get the animal out of the queue for the altar. Yes, just so. Just so. I mean, Jewish law is just so complicated. That's why we need sages in every generation to give us guidance. Today, in our show this morning, we had a discussion, beautiful lecture taught by Rabbi Meni Chazanov on the question of can Kohanim, right, priests, the descendants of priests, we still know who the Kohanim are. They're not, the temple's not standing, so they haven't served in the temple in 2,000 years. But Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron, often people name Cohen, but those are not the only ones, still have a role to play, especially in Israel. They do this every day, and here on holidays, they bless the congregation. I'm a Levite. We, the Levites, wash the hands of the Kohanim. But one of the requirements of Kohanim is to not become impure for the dead unless it's a very close relative. And it's interesting because we're all assumed to be Tameh, because we don't know where the dead bodies are. We haven't had the ashes of the red heifer and the ability to purify ourselves in many centuries. So everyone is assumed to be in a state of ritual impurity. Nevertheless, the prohibition on Kohanim to not become impure for the dead continues, and so they don't enter a cemetery unless it's to bury a very close relative. And then the question came up, can Kohanim visit the grave of a tzaddik, right? Of great tzaddikim, great people in Jewish history. If you go to Hebron, you can visit the graves of, Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca and Jacob and Leah. You can also go to Kever Rachel. You can go to all kinds of places in Eastern Europe. There's the graves of tremendous rabbis, great tzaddikim, the greatest rabbi of the generation. And many people go there to pray to God, but to sort of beseech the assistance and the blessing of the tzaddik at his grave. You don't pray to a dead person. We only pray to God. But these grave sites are very holy places, and you can kind of feel the holiness and spirituality there. It's a wonderful place to pray to God. But can a Cohen go to that place? Generally accepted principle, no. The answer is no. Unless they, in their family, subscribe to one of the sort of minority opinion traditions that would permit it. And there's a few, and they're interesting, and they're often based in the Zohar, in the mystical tradition. But fascinating question, not easily answered. If you're a Cohen, you'd have to really do research on this, although the basic opinion is you can't go. However, at most of those locations, they have a place for the Kohanim to go where they can get near the grave and be assured of not standing on anybody else's grave, so that it would be permitted. An example of that is the the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in New York City, in Queens. near JFK Airport, and Kohanim can go there. They have to follow special rules, but if you've ever been there or seen pictures, that path that you walk down to the graveside is down a path, fence on each side. When you get around to where the Rebbe is buried beside his father-in-law, there's no roof there, so you're not under, tuma of a tent, etc. There's all kinds of adjustments that were made so Kohanim can get relatively close. But these are the kinds of questions that we couldn't answer by ourselves just based on our logic when we're learning Talmud. We need the help and advice and guidance of our sages, ancient and modern. That's what I've got for us today. If you haven't seen Guns and Moses, please go today. If it's in a city near you, we need to have a great opening weekend so that we can expand and reach more cities. All the best. Have a great day. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. All the best.